Right, so the Egyptian plan to reconstruct the Gaza Strip, which I have gone into the details of in an earlier video, represent a comprehensive blueprint for addressing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza following Israel's devastating military campaign, even if there are some sticking points over some of the details. Endorsed as it has been, though, by several Arab nations and supported by the Palestinian Authority as well, that $53 billion plan prioritises rebuilding infrastructure, restoring essential services, and establishing a transitional government's framework, while firmly rejecting any notion or demand of forced displacement of the people of Gaza whilst that reconstruction process takes place. That said, however, the plan has now been met with fierce opposition from the big orange man baby soiling his diaper over it, Donald Trump, and obviously the Israeli government, both of whom have dismissed it in favour of their own controversial proposals, let's put it politely, which requires the removal of the entire Palestinian people from their own land, of course, ethnic cleansing, a war crime, and therefore Trump's plan and Israeli support for it is a non-starter. Their counter-arguments, though, are hilariously weak, and all they have managed to do in light of the Egyptian plan being made public is expose their real motivations behind their rejection. It highlights the existential threat the plan poses to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership and his fears over that, power being his all-consuming and overriding priority above all else, as we all well know. Right, so Egypt's $53 billion reconstruction plan for Gaza. It's not a straightforward proposal, not a cheap proposal, but it is incredibly detailed. It's also being surprisingly quick. They reckon just 5 years is all it will take to rebuild Gaza. Whilst all of that is taking place, they will also have implemented an initiative designed to address immediate and long-term concerns and needs of the people of Gaza there, currently left as they have been, with absolutely nothing. My other video goes into this in a lot more detail, but a quick overview of it is that the plan prioritises the reconstruction of Gaza's devastated infrastructure, including housing, schools, hospitals and water, electricity networks, along with the construction of 200,000 housing units, rising to 460,000 to accommodate displaced family, and providing housing in the long term for up to 3 million people. The plan also aims to stimulate Gaza's economy by creating jobs and investing in key sectors such as agriculture, industry and technology. And this includes the construction of a seaport to facilitate trade and the establishment of a 600-acre industrial zone. There will be the establishment of a transitional governance arrangement in Gaza as well, with the Palestinian Authority playing a central role in that and Hamas getting sidelined, which Hamas are actually on board with, though they are not prepared to disarm over it. The plan also calls for elections to establish a unified Palestinian leadership, which the Palestinian Authority appear to actually be on board with, despite Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, having avoided elections since 2006. But the plan also calls for the deployment of an international peacekeeping force to provide security during the reconstruction process. And this force, which is expected to include troops from Arab nations and the United Nations, will be tasked with preventing renewed conflict and ensuring the safe delivery of aid and the safety of all those working in that reconstruction process. The overarching cornerstone of the Egyptian plan, however, is that everything works around its firm rejection of any form of forced displacement of the Palestinians from Gaza, completely contrary to Donald Trump's proposal, and this reflects the broader global consensus on the preservation of Palestinian rights and identity, which is crucial. It is not for Donald Trump or Israel to eradicate them as they see fit. But despite the widespread acceptance of the Egyptian plan across the Arab nations who attended yesterday's summit in Cairo, and amongst people who have heard of this news more widely around the world, because this plan has not been widely reported in Western mainstream media, as per usual, both Donald Trump and the Israeli government have rejected it, offering pathetic, weak and completely typical for them whining that fails to stand up to any scrutiny at all. Donald Trump's opposition to the Egyptian plan is rooted in his own preference for his Gaza Riviera proposal, as it's been called, which we've seen the AI video of, haven't we? It envisages the forced displacement of all Palestinians from Gaza to make way for luxury resorts and hotels, casinos, big gold statues of himself, Gaza-Lago as I've nicknamed it, an abomination of capitalism to enrich himself at the expense of nigh on 2 million Palestinians. Trump has laid into the Egyptian plan for not including provisions for the expulsion of Palestinians, arguing that Gaza should be free from Hamas and rebuilt as a tourist destination. Morally reprehensible and legally indefensible. Frankly, that's a sentence that should also be the epitaph carved into his gravestone come the time. It sums the man up beautifully as much as it does his rancid, illegal Gaza plan. So, shall we tear his excuses apart? Yes, let's, Damo. Okay. You shouldn't need saying, but Trump is as hard of thinking as he is hard of hearing. But ethnic cleansing, as he has proposed, is a war crime, and he's suspect to international law as anybody else's. Trump's demand for the forced displacement of Palestinians amounts to ethnic cleansing, therefore it is a war crime. Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention explicitly prohibits the forcible transfer of protected persons. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court classifies such acts as war crimes. So by advocating for the expulsion of Palestinians, Trump is endorsing policies that violate fundamental principles of international humanitarian law, and we either stand up for those or they simply don't matter anymore. Trump's proposal to transform Gaza into a pit of excess and a den of iniquity is not only illegal but also deeply offensive to the Palestinian people. It shows a blatant disregard for Palestinian rights and an immoral willingness to erase Palestinian identity for the sake of a personal economic gain. It is a blatant violation of Palestinian sovereignty and self-determination, and nobody should accept that in their right mind. But then, this is Donald Trump, of course. Trump has also argued that the Egyptian plan does not adequately address the issue of Hamas, that it leaves them intact. But this is both hypocritical and disingenuous, because whilst the Egyptian plan excludes Hamas from the transitional government, removes power from them, it has also garnered the group's support for this plan. Therefore, the Egyptian plan has merit built on stability moving forwards in Gaza. Trump's insistence on a Gaza free from Hamas is a thinly veiled attempt to justify the expulsion of Palestinians and impose a solution. It tars all Palestinians in Gaza as Hamas, and it only serves Israeli and US interests at the expense of Palestinian rights, when if successful, there would be no need for Hamas going forwards. It is the ongoing threat to Gaza from Israel and supporters like the US that excuse Hamas of their continued existence. The atrocity goes both ways. Both Hamas and Israel deserve condemnation for where Gaza is today. But moving on to Israel, though, the Israeli government's rejection of the Egyptian plan is just as unconvincing and reflects a broader agenda aimed at preserving Benjamin Netanyahu's political survival, because that is always his priority in everything, as we should all damn well know by now. Netanyahu's opposition to the Egyptian plan is driven by his desire to see the Palestinian people removed completely and free up that land for other purposes. His purposes, the purposes of the settler movement who have designs on it, though whether they figure into Trump's plans isn't entirely clear. The Egyptian plan, with its emphasis on reconstruction and transitional governance, represents an existential threat to Netanyahu's leadership, as it undermines his narrative of perpetual conflict, undermines his arguments about Hamas, who will not be involved in transitional government, and total need for the military action that he keeps calling for. Contrary to that is the pressure being heaped upon him, of course, by his far-right coalition partners, who want to open the gates of hell now in Gaza and take over that land for their own backers, the settler movement. They hold Netanyahu's premiership in their hands, of course, and that is the crux of the problem with getting Israel on side to any plan that doesn't involve Gaza being handed to the settlers now. They never will agree to this unless forced to by outside pressures. And fundamentally, I can't see it being agreed to whilst Netanyahu puts his own self-preservation first at all times. Israel's opposition to the Egyptian plan is ultimately also rooted in its refusal to accept Palestinian rights and their right to self-determination. Its own racism, its own oppression drives matters just as much. By rejecting a plan that prioritises reconstruction and rejects forced displacement, Israel is signalling its commitment to maintaining control over Gaza and preventing the emergence of a viable Palestinian state, which is utterly anathema to them. I'm not sure how many times an Israeli figure has to pour scorn on the prospect of a two-state solution for people to realise Israel will never actually support this, never support a state for people they view as human animals and secondary to their own white supremacy. Fundamentally, what we have here is a tale of two agendas that may or may not complement each other, all things considered. Trump's rejection of the Egyptian plan is driven by his desire to impose a solution that serves US and Israeli interests at the expense of Palestinian rights and the ongoing existence of the Palestinian people of Gaza in effect. His Gaza Riviera proposal reflects a vision of Gaza as a resource to be exploited for his own money-grubbing greed rather than a homeland for its people. Netanyahu's opposition to the Egyptian plan is motivated by his need to maintain his grip on power in Israel. The plan's emphasis on reconstruction and transitional governance undermines Netanyahu's narrative of perpetual conflict and the need for military action always. By rejecting the plan, Netanyahu is seeking to preserve his own political survival and avoid accountability for his government's actions in Gaza, independent investigations still getting blocked by Israel, of course. The Egyptian plan represents an existential threat to Netanyahu's leadership in Israel. by offering a viable path to reconstruction and stability in Gaza, the plan undermines Netanyahu's narrative of permanent conflict. It also exposes the failure of his government's policies in Gaza, which have resulted in widespread death and destruction and severe humanitarian suffering, whilst achieving none of their goals. That his aid blockade is now driving that humanitarian suffering once more. If the Egyptian plan gets implemented, it could pave the way for a political process that challenges Israeli dominance in the region, brings about the end of Netanyahu, and opens the door to a more just and equitable resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if he can be replaced by a leader that can actually be reasoned with, is actually a diplomat interested in diplomacy, and actually puts Israeli interests first. See Israel answer for its war crimes as well, obviously, as surely they must, but more than personal interests, which are all that drive Netanyahu. The rejection of the Egyptian plan by Donald Trump and the Netanyahu-led Israeli government shows their arguments to be nothing but whinging about their own personal losses and their own personal greed and their desires and their wants. It also illustrates the challenges facing the Palestinian people in their struggle for justice and self-determination as well, though. Trump's Gaza Riviera proposal, with its calls for ethnic cleansing and the war crimes that would be committed, represents a grave threat to Palestinian rights, and it's got to be firmly rejected. It is a non-starter. It must never come to pass, never be allowed to happen. And the weak arguments put forward by Trump and Israel against the Egyptian plan exposes their own real motivations, which are rooted in a desire to seize and control Gaza and advance their own political and greed-driven agendas. The answer to that is that it's not on, it's not happening, we're going to call you out for it. Even as this story goes poorly reported still, despite being potentially an historic turning point for Gaza. Meanwhile, of course, Israel has, to all intents and purposes, already ended that ceasefire, haven't they, with its aid blockade, further strikes up and down the Gaza Strip. In the last few days, war crimes being committed again and again, and it is again going poorly reported. You can get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, of course. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to the channel as well, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, holding power to account for ordinary working class people as we do here, and helping to support the channel at the same time as that does, which is massively appreciated, and I will hopefully therefore catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.